Should we kick off with a raise of hands? So can you put your hand in the air if you've either set up your own business or you've helped somebody else set up a business? Anyone? Oh, that's a pretty good showing. So can you keep your hand in the air if you felt that that was a particularly easy process, that getting something off the ground was, and commercially successful was not a particularly challenging endeavor? Yeah, me neither. And the stats pretty much bear that out. So if you set up a company, the average is that 9 out of 10 startups will go bust in their first 5 years. So that's a pretty big reality check. So try to imagine all of the angst in setting up a startup. Try to imagine all the commercial risk. Try to imagine all the admin burden. Try to imagine like all of the, trying to get access to capital. And you've got this kind of ball of stress and challenge in your life. But now, in the spirit of LGBT pride that kicks off next week, try to imagine how much more difficult that process would be, say if you were a transgender person. Not only would you be having to deal with all of the shit, basically, of setting up a business, but you'd also have to be dealing with people's attitudes, general kind of social prejudices towards who you are. And that's basically why I helped set up the Dots, and it's also why I helped set up Series Q. I'll talk very quickly about Series Q because it's a bit of an interesting story in terms of my life. So I moved to London 2 years ago from Australia to help set up the Dots, and I couldn't believe it when I got here. So when I got here, and all I wanted to do was get involved in all of the local ecosystem of startups. I wanted to understand a little bit more about recruitment. I obviously wanted to meet other entrepreneurs. And in this huge market, this huge startup ecosystem in London, there wasn't any LGBT presence at all. So that, as an LGBT individual, that's obviously one of the first networks that I'll go to. So there's a saying, if you don't fit into a scene, make your own. And so I got a bunch of people together and we started up Series Q. And so in a very small way, we're now helping entrepreneurs in London to just feel a little bit more loved and get together and be able to network. So why do I tell that story? It's just because I'm very passionate about bringing marginalized people in from the periphery and giving them the visibility that I feel that they need. And ultimately, that's why I moved over here to help set up the Dots. Forbes very kindly asked, are they the next LinkedIn? So the Dots is in the creative industries. We're very passionate about diversity in the creative industries. I personally am myself, because I've seen what happens when it goes wrong. And when it goes wrong, it can go catastrophically wrong. So can anyone tell me what this is, or what this represents? Any ideas?
A big mistake.
A big mistake. So it's a still from Pepsi's recent ad campaign that kicked off 2 months ago. And in case you care, that's Kendall Jenner in the middle. So can anyone tell me why this was a bit of a disaster? Any ideas?
It seemed to belittle the Black Lives Matter movement.
That's exactly it. For anyone who didn't hear, it politicized the Black Lives movement, it commercialized it, and made it seem, a little bit open to marketing. Particularly, the message from the campaign was that if protesters were only a little bit nicer and gave police cans of Pepsi, then perhaps there wouldn't be so much ruckus at protests. So as you can imagine, there was a pretty huge backlash to this. Pepsi, unfortunately, had to pull the entire ad campaign after being roundly mocked. This was dubbed by Jimmy Kimmel as the Attractive Lives Matter campaign. So after 3 days of airing, they pulled the campaign. Unfortunately, had to deal with a brand that was in tatters. Pepsi slipped from a relatively high position in the brand score index to having the lowest position in the carbonated drinks market, and had to issue a fairly groveling apology. So that's the kind of thing that can happen in the advertising industry. But PR Week did a pretty good job of digging into this and asked the question, how could this have gone so catastrophically wrong? And the answer that came back, the number one reason was a lack of diversity within Pepsi. So the creative team that put this campaign together were, you guessed it, all white. And that problem is quite emblematic of what's happening in the creative industries. The creative industries has an image of being very diverse and very inclusive, but unfortunately, that's not necessarily the case. So I'll rattle off some stats for you. I know how much everyone loves stats. But of all the people who work in the creative industries, only 37% are female. And once you take away more junior roles, and once you take away more routine tasks, that proportion drops even further. So once you also get outside of software, the proportion of employees who are from a BAME background is also notably below national averages. And there's if you look at the creative industries employment, 92% of people who work in the creative industries are from the more affluent half of the United Kingdom's population. So only 8% come from the less affluent half of the UK's population of almost 70 million. So those are some pretty sobering stats. Does this actually cause problems like further down the line or in day-to-day running of the creative industries? Well, it seems to be that yes, it does. So Hastings College of Law about 2 years ago released a study where they had surveyed 60 female BAME technologists and scientists. And the results of that study were quite stark. Every single one of the women surveyed had experienced some degree of discrimination or some degree of general bias, either for racial or for gender reasons. An astonishing 50% had been confused with janitors at some point in their career, which is an absolutely shocking number. So it's important that we recognize that there's a cost here. And the cost can be either very direct, as Pepsi found out. Pepsi had to basically write off $5 million of production costs for their recent ad campaign. Or alternatively, the costs can be more insidious. They can be more widespread. So, for example, it could be those BAME technologists and scientists who decided to leave their industries because they felt like they didn't belong. Or it could be lesbian or gay potential candidates for a role in the creative industries, but who didn't quite want to get involved with what's perceived to be quite a clubby atmosphere of white middle-class straight men. Now, don't get me wrong, I've got nothing against white middle-class straight men. Nobody's perfect. I mean, and certainly as a white man myself, I'm certainly not going to lecture anyone on diversity. But what I do want to do is share some observations that we've been able to generate through our technology platform that hopefully you might be able to find useful today. So firstly, a little bit of background as to who we are. So the DOTS is, as Stephen so kindly introduced me, effectively like a LinkedIn for the creative industries. So a creative person can visit the DOTS, can set up a profile, can post their work, and then can network around their work. And the crucial difference with LinkedIn is that here, it's not about who you know, it's about the quality of your work. So it's not about your entrenched networks, it's about your work, if it's good, rising to the very top. The DOTS was founded initially, probably just over 10 years ago, by our CEO, Pip Jameson, when she was back in Australia. So she used to work for MTV over there. And one of the challenges she found at MTV was recruiting. She couldn't recruit through LinkedIn because she wanted to get a relatively diverse employment base in her creative team. But at the same time, MTV Australia, the majority of people were recruiting through their personal networks. So the result is that everyone had been to similar schools, everyone had been to similar universities, everybody thought the same, everybody had the same creative ideas, everybody had the same ideas regarding creative direction. And so what happened was, basically you had homogeneity encapsulated. So in 2009, Pip quit MTV Australia, co-founded a precursor to the DOTS in Australia, built that up to be a very successful business, successfully exited, and then brought the DOTS over here 3 years ago. So that's basically where we are today. And it's the way that we think about the DOTS is diversity is very, very, very much, I guess, core to our values. It's one of the main reasons why we have set up the DOTS. And I just want to share with you a number of ways that we've been able to engender a more diverse creative community on our platform. So we go about this by just trying to identify very easy habits to get into. very easy daily rules that we can apply in order to, as I say, bring visibility in for people who might feel marginalized. So we have a couple of rules. The first rule is that over 50% of our featured content on our platform must be authored by women. So women make up over 50% of the UK population, so it's only fair that they get over 50% of our features. The second rule is that over 30% of work that we feature has to be authored by a BAME creative. And this solves quite a substantial problem within the creative industries, which is that BAME creatives are suffering from a relative lack of visibility compared to their white counterparts. So those are the kind of things that we do every day. And then we also run a number of different tentpole initiatives to be able to promote different minority groups. So for example, for International Women's Day this year, we had an entire female takeover of the dots. So we featured 150 of the top creative female talent throughout the entire week of around International Women's Day. And next week we'll be doing the same. So Pride kicks off next week, and we'll be doing a very similar thing for our LGBT community and partnering with WeTransfer so that their work will also be featured on WeTransfer's page, which gets tens of millions of hits a day. So again, it just comes back to using the communicative power of our technology stack to increase the visibility of groups that may previously be seen to be marginalized. So that's a pretty important message for us. So it's starting to bear a bit of fruit. So we were set up in the UK 2.5 years ago. It's proving quite relatively popular with our community. We've got a pretty good success factor with our membership. So over 60% of our members are female. So that pretty much reverses the underrepresentation that you see in the creative industries. And the best thing is it's pretty much free. So our technology automatically floats the best work and the most popular work to the top. And then it's a very easy process of just curating work and just giving visibility to people who may feel alienated within a particular section of the creative industries. It's also, these types of initiatives are very popular with our younger members as well. So about 3/4 of our membership are under the age of 35. So that's relatively pleasing. But we also work very closely with our clients. We have a number of quite large clients within digital media, Facebook, Microsoft, Channel 4, and a number of others. So I just want to share perhaps 3 key lessons that these organizations have learned, share these as insights over the 2.5 years that we've been working with them. Firstly, it may sound innocuous, but a job description can be a tremendous inhibitor of acquiring diverse candidates. So what does this mean? Well, this is something that Microsoft found out. Microsoft, unfortunately, had been positioning text in their job descriptions that was quite masculine and overly technical. So the effect of this was to turn off potential female and LGBT candidates who looked at the job description and who saw Microsoft as being an overly masculine organization. It sounds like a small thing, but it was enough to shift the dial for Microsoft to take action. So how is it possible for you guys as recruiters to perhaps mitigate this risk? Well, if you are about to push a JD live, it might help just to put it in front of somebody in your organization who does come from a different background to yourself, just to make sure that there aren't any problematic nuances or parts of text in the job description itself. The second insight that we hear practically from all our clients and that they're really trying to do practically every day is to broaden their acquisition funnels. And this is kind of an ongoing battle. There are 2 quite easy ways to do this. So a number of our clients have found that simply by posting jobs on different jobs boards, that brings in a slightly more representative candidate pool. Another way is to actually physically change the networks of the organization. So a particular client of ours actually changed their board of directors to bring in a more ethnically diverse board, and that automatically opened up the organization to a broader professional acquisition channel. And then I think the final point is maybe a little bit counterintuitive, but it's to hire less on cultural fit and more on values fit. And this is a pretty key learn from Facebook, actually, who had been hiring based on cultural fit. But one of the issues with that particular hiring strategy is that you tend to hire people like yourself. You tend to hire people who you'd like to go to the pub with. And that's fantastic in the short term. But in the longer term, that can lead to a slightly more homogeneous workforce, which is obviously what we're trying to avoid. The great thing about hiring based on values is that hiring based on a value set almost acts like a social glue that can align teams within the organization towards the value statement of that organization. So it can almost be a good lodestone in that regard. And it also, in many ways, forces people to think more creatively about the type of people that they are bringing on as potential candidates. So hopefully these are some insightful lessons for you to be able to take home and apply either to your organizations or to assist your client organizations. But just to close, just one final request: whatever happens, just don't do a Pepsi. Thanks so much.